It's already been a blessing. I know it's going to continue to be. I really appreciate this topic. It's something that's always appropriate, always beneficial. This morning's lesson, offending God's little ones. We recently discussed how children fully rely on their parents for all things, and that as children of God, so we are to look to Him to supply all of our needs. Psalms 131 and 2, surely I have behaved and quieted myself as a child that is weaned of his mother. My soul is even as a weaned child. Now what happens in offenses is that what happens in offenses is that we had relied on God in the past. What we tried to rely on God for in the past, we now try to deal with ourselves. One problem that we know is addressed is in James 1, 19 and 20. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. This verse applies to both ends of any offense. If the offender will be slow to speak, the offense could be avoided altogether before it occurs. And if the one who is potentially offended will be slow to speak, then the situation won't necessarily escalate into an offense. And if we're quick to listen, we may realize that what we think we heard is not actually what we heard. Sometimes that brief moment before an actual offense occurs, by simply allowing our minds to fully process the situation, it's all that's needed to recognize a simple misunderstanding. Other times, the offense may be intentional. Yet the truth behind this passage from James remains in effect. If we rely on God, He will take care of the situation in His way and in His time. If we try to fix the situation ourselves, we must realize that we have the assurance that we will make things worse. In the commentary this morning, we have previously considered what are the sources of offenses. We noted that they can occur anytime there's a misunderstanding between people or someone's behavior does not measure up to or conform to the expectations of others. Furthermore, there may not always be a clear demarcation of who offended whom, all parties believing the others to be at fault. Complicating matters even further, there may be no physical basis for an offense. Nothing specific has been said or done. No one was punched in the nose. But rather, someone feels as if they have been in some way misunderstood or mistreated. Offenses can arise among any people, even close friends, at any time and anywhere differences or misunderstandings may occur. In this lesson, we wish to consider a particular type of offense, which Christ has declared to be a very serious matter, that, whether intended or not, also personally affects Him. The golden truth, and whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believeth in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he were cast into the sea. Mark 9:42. What we need to understand about this type of offense is that it has the potential to destroy souls eternally. It should be our first and foremost desire as children of God to win the lost to the Lord and encourage their spiritual growth. When these types of offenses occur, we're doing the exact opposite of this. We're no longer working for God, but we're working against God. We cannot be the people whom God would have us to be if by our actions we are hindering the work that He sent us to accomplish. Jesus was speaking of the Sabbath when He said in Luke 6 and 9, Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it? As we well know, this extends to every day with the advent of the New Testament era. Speaking of the Sabbath, it is never acceptable to do evil for any purpose, but helping and encouraging others will never bring about theirs or our downfall. We are called to be blessings to those around us, both in and out of the church. As when Paul described the fruit of the Spirit, when he finished, he wrote, "Against such there is no law." Anything we do that would cause another to spiritually stumble is sin. But it is never out of place for us to be a blessing to souls. Have any comments on this introductory portion here before we get into the rest of the lesson? Part 1, the disciples offend a little one. Of the many circumstances and misunderstandings that can result among offended parties, there is one type that is particularly grievous to our Lord. In both Mark chapter 9 and Matthew chapter 18, the Lord expresses how He feels about those who would offend His little ones. He's not speaking of infants in age, but of those who might be compared to such spiritually. For their humility and modesty, who were little in their own eyes. In order that we might better understand who these little ones are, let us consider what had transpired in Mark chapter 9 just before He made this ghastly statement. Mark 9, 38 through 42. And John answered him, saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth us not. And we forbade him, because he followeth us not. But Jesus said, Forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me. For he that is not against us and is on our part. For whosoever shall give you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, verily I say unto you, he shall not lose his reward. And whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he were cast into the sea. John, along with Christ's other disciples, had observed someone casting out devils in their Lord's name. The disciples felt that surely this would be viewed as an offense to their Lord. So they had taken steps to rebuke this person. They forbade him to speak thus anymore. They, no doubt, reaffirmed to one another their feelings and approval regarding how they had conducted themselves in this manner. Now, confident among themselves that they had done righteously, that is, their righteous indignation was justified, they thus reported back to their Lord what they had done, how they had faithfully defended the faith. No doubt they fully expected to receive His approval and commendation of what they had done. We're not told much else about this person whom they had rebuked. Might he have been a follower of John the Baptist, who now followed Jesus afar? Somewhere, perhaps, he had witnessed the disciples of the 12 or the 70 that Christ had sent forth, thus performed such miracles, and the glorious responses that followed, and now was in earnest copying them. Neither are we told how he reacted to the stern warning of John and the other disciples. Did he respond back to them? Did he try to reason with them that he was doing good works in the Master's name? Did he follow their admonition and indeed stop, ultimately falling back to the lifestyle which he followed before knowing the power of Christ's name? Like Apollos, a follower of John the Baptist in Acts chapter 18, did this one eventually become a follower of Christ and a member of His body, the church? We just don't know. We often take for granted the power of the seeds that we sow in this life. We often don't even realize that we have any potential to hinder or help others by our words and our actions. We don't realize what we're doing most of the time. Our lives should be intentional in our service to the Lord. But Jesus, speaking to the Pharisees, reminds us all of the power of the tongue as well as the source of the words we speak. Sorry. Matthew 12:34 through 36. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth good things. And an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. But I say unto you, that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. Now, we read in Proverbs 18:21 that the power of death, life and death, lies within the human tongue. If our hearts are submitted fully to the Spirit, our words are naturally going to bring forth life and peace. But if our words bring divisions and offense, then we can be certain that our hearts are not under the control of God, but under the influences of the enemy. James understood this and warns us of this tactic of the adversary in James 3:2, 5, 6, and 10. I'm just trying to compress this a little bit here, the most important, relevant portions. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. In verse 10, out of the same mouth proceedeth blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. What is inside of us, what is in our heart, as Jesus says, will eventually be made known. Now, reading these verses in this lesson should help us to become more self-aware, so that we can recognize these shortcomings and surrender them to God for our own eternal benefit, as well as the eternal benefit of those who come into contact with us. I don't want my words to push people away from God.
Right.
I don't want my words to push people away from me. But I want the words that I speak to be a blessing. I want the words that I speak to draw souls to the truth. Even if I'm not speaking the name of Jesus, my attitudes, my actions, even if I'm not intentionally witnessing in public to a group or an individual, my life and my actions should be so focused on my service to the Lord that the things that I say and do would draw people to God and not push them farther away. I remember one situation, it was very unpleasant to watch, but an older couple had pulled into a parking spot, and I didn't see anybody around anywhere that was trying to get into that parking spot, but they just pulled into that parking spot. Now, this isn't precisely covering this topic, but I think it fits in. Well, some young kid jumped out of his car in the middle of the parking lot and started cussing them. You stole my parking spot. Just going on and on. And this was an older couple. They were walking slowly. They were not trying to cause problems. They didn't whip in really quickly or anything. They just pulled into this parking spot. And then this other person comes and starts yelling at them. And as they go across the road, they hear him, they see him, they acknowledge that he's there. And they just keep walking. And meanwhile, he's continuing to cuss them, continuing to yell at them, and they just keep walking. And as they get closer to the sidewalk to walk into the building, they step up on the sidewalk and say, God bless you. And they just go on into the store. And meanwhile, the kid's still cussing them. Now, I don't know that had any effect on that kid, but it had an effect on me. I wasn't involved in that situation at all, except for the fact that I saw it. But that ministered to me. How do I deal with people when they come against me? How do I deal with people when they attack me? Because these people were being attacked verbally, viciously being attacked verbally for no reason that I could see. How do we respond? How do we respond when people come against us? In this instance, it is clear that this individual was coming against this couple, attacking them verbally. Sometimes the attacks we perceive aren't truly attacks at all, but just misperceptions of words that we assume to be attacks. And I'm not saying they handled it perfectly. Obviously, the kid didn't handle it well. But I saw that simply as a witness, not one who's involved, just a witness. And that, I can't even tell you how many years ago that was. It might have been 20 years ago. But to this day, that affects me. How do I respond? Yes?
I might be possibly doing one of my devotions on it.
Uh-oh.
But I was listening to something the other day. I listen to podcasts and things quite often when I'm cleaning. And we were talking about it being proactive and reactive.
Mm. And
those people were not reactive in the situation.
Right.
If they had been reactive in the situation, it would have been probably pretty detrimental.
Wouldn't have helped any.
It wouldn't have helped any. And if we can learn that and not be reactive.
Right.
But, to me, the proactive part would be asking the Lord to help us throughout the day, whatever comes to us. Because there could be a million things going on in our mind, and we could be reactive to something like that. Like, where were you in the whole situation? I might not have cussed them out, but I said, where were you in that situation? Where were you? I didn't even see you, and I'm here in this parking place now. But those people didn't say anything.
Right.
They weren't reactive. And sometimes silence is probably better. As Mom used to say, you can't say anything good, don't say it at all. So don't be reactive.
I love something. It may be biblical, it may not. I don't know. I just know that it's really wise words. That it's better to be silent and to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. So we need to be careful with our words and how we respond. That old couple may have looked foolish, completely ignoring this individual. And they may have been, like you said, in their minds praying the whole time, what do we do? What do we do? We need to be able to have that relationship with God in such a way. I heard someone say, and I may be guilty of it myself, well, that's not how I wanted to respond, but you caught me off guard. Have you ever thought that? That's not what I intended, but you caught me off guard. Well, in those instances, what we come to find out is, if we really think about it, if you're on guard, that means you're covering something up. You're trying to press something down. You have time to, if you caught me and I had my guard up, that means that I was prepared to respond properly to that situation. So what that means is, if you say that someone caught you off guard, and that's why the situation worked out the way it was, what it means is that was truly who's inside of you. That is truly who you are. When we are caught off guard, that's who we are. That's what is inside of us. And once again, going back to what Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. So that's to say, if someone catches us off guard and we fly off the handle, so to speak, at them, what that means is, we're getting ready to start section 2 here in just a second. What that means is, that's what's inside of us. But if we respond properly when someone attacks us, that can only be God working in us. So we need to be careful. If we ever think to ourselves, well, they just caught me off guard, remember, that's who you truly are. If people catch you off guard and you respond appropriately, then Christ is the one in control of your life. The Spirit of God is leading you and directing your words. But if your response only escalates an already tense situation, that means you're in control and you're not allowing Christ to have His way. Are there any other comments as we move into this next section, before we move into the next section?
There's a song that's out now that talks about your words and how they have an effect. And it says, your words can build you up or words can tear you down. They can set a fire in your heart or they can blow it out.
Right.
And so let our words be true. Let them really reflect Christ in every way, even if, we're just goofing off at Huddle House after church, whatever it may be, just be aware of your words, because I know people who have been offended for years and years over something that was said to them unintentionally, with no intentions to offend, but it did offend.
Right.
And people can get so stuck in that offense, it's hard for them to get past it. And it could say, oh, well, they need to be stronger in Christ. Well, you can't just say they need to be stronger in Christ, because clearly there's something that, they're going to need some help. So, we got to watch our words. For those who might be a little bit weaker, it may be a little, we don't want to offend anybody with our words.
I love what Paul says in Romans about what is it that you don't come against others because you're just as guilty, basically is what he says. We need to be careful how we accuse others. Well, I wouldn't have handled it that way. First off, anytime you say I, that's pride. It's based on pride. I wouldn't have done that, or I would have done it this way. First off, that's pride. Second, do you really know? Can you be certain that that's how you would have handled that situation, being in the same circumstances? So we need to allow the Spirit to be in control so that we can't be caught off guard, so to speak. Because when the Spirit's in control, we will allow Him to respond through us. And it will not be in a way that causes more problems. It will be in a way that silences the situation, that will resolve the situation, that will be a benefit to those around us. Yes?
In James 1:19, so wherefore, my brethren, beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath.
Right. The wrath
You
of...
need to watch, listen, but don't just jump at the first action of your mind, because, a lot of times,
Absolutely.
our anger will allow us to say things that we need to take back, but we'll just be slow and just, let the Lord have it and call on Him and let Him give us the answer to say.
Words cannot be unspoken.
That's right.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that very next verse is, the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. There's nothing we can do in anger that's going to fix a situation. Yes?
Sister Sarah, Brother Rick are both talking about the proactive.
Right, exactly.
That's what I was saying, the reactive aspect.
Absolutely.
Being proactive, being slow to speak, think before you speak, because those words could be harmful to others. And ask the Lord to help us. I did it the other day. I was like, Lord, you're going to have to help me through this. I need your help.
Right.
Because Wendy would automatically just
Right.
maybe say something hurtful.
Right.
But I'm like, Lord, I cannot say something hurtful in the situation. I don't need to. I need to be proactive and help me get the words in my mouth that'll be pleasing to you and not what I want to do and say.
How great a fire a little matter kindleth.
In verse 26, it said, if any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain.
Right.
So, out of the heart the mouth will speak.
That's exactly what Jesus said. Ye shall know them by their fruit. When we say ye shall know them by their fruit, we often want to point at them. Ye shall know them by their fruit. But we also are known by our fruit.
Right.
That includes the words we speak. Yes, I'm sorry.
When they brought the woman to Jesus for caught her in the very act,
Right,
everybody says, what was he writing on the ground?
right,
And no matter what he's writing, he was waiting on the Lord to give him what to say and how to say it. And if you wait for your anger
mm-hmm.
to calm down, you won't be as foolish to answer.
Right,
And I tell everybody, I said, it wasn't important what he was writing on the ground. I said, he might have been drawing donuts or something. I said, but he had the right words to say.
right. Absolutely. And that's what we need to do. We need to wait on the Lord and not respond immediately the first thought that comes to our head. Because when we do, usually 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be beneficial.
The Lord's our buckler. If we don't have to be on guard if we're following Him. He
Right.
guards us from ourselves.
If we'll trust Him, He will. Absolutely.
I think what everybody's saying goes back to kind of what Sister Wendy was bringing up. I remember preaching a message one time that was entitled, "An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure."
Absolutely.
And if you study much about the healthcare system as a whole, the United States is the worst in the world as far as healthcare. Because
Absolutely.
we are that reactive nation.
Yes.
We wait until we're sick to go to the doctor. We
Right.
wait until we've got something wrong with us to try to make it better.
Right.
Whereas if you go over to Europe, many of the countries there have a proactive approach that they're constantly getting these checkups along the way
Right.
to try to stay ahead of the sickness.
Right.
And the people overall are generally much healthier
Mm-hmm.
because it's better to stay ahead of it.
Right.
Spiritually, we need to realize we will be much healthier in our relationship with Christ if we stay ahead. And I had somebody in my life that meant a lot to me growing up that used to tell me every morning they would wake up and they would start before they ever got their feet on the ground. They would stop and they would say, "Lord, sanctify me today.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, sanctify my heart, sanctify my mind, sanctify the words that come out of my mouth."
Mm-hmm.
And that's taking that proactive step
Absolutely.
to say, every single day, I'm going to make sure that I start my day with keeping this in subjection
Right.
to the Lord.
It's a wonderful point. It goes right back to what Paul said. He said, I die daily.
Right.
Daily. It's our responsibility to die to self daily. Sanctification, great, wonderful, but you must die daily. It's not simply that one trip to the altar. It's that continual recognition that I always have the potential to fall. We've seen it. I know that the majority of us here personally have known people who firmly stood for the truth, and we looked up to these individuals, and now they're gone. If it could happen to them, it can happen to us.
Right.
We need to be aware that none of us are beyond failing the Lord. Let me try to get through a little bit more of this here this morning. I love the discussion. It's well worth it. I don't want to in any way insinuate that we don't need to receive this, because most of what we receive, the best of what we receive, is from you guys. In part 2, Christ instructs his misguided disciples. What we are told is how the Master responded with all gravity and frankness to their misadventure. The confidence of the disciples that they had judged and executed righteous judgment now was shattered by the Master. He made his disappointment in them quite clear. First, the Master rebuked them for their grave misjudgment. He said, "Forbid them not." He also provided them with a reason why this person should be allowed to proceed. No man which shall do a miracle in my name can lightly speak evil of me. This person's good deeds would far outshine any presumed harm he may cause. Excuse me. Paul provided similar explanation to Christ's reasoning regarding those who shared the gospel in Philippians 1:18. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice. Learning to look beyond the bad so that we might see the good can be a most difficult task, but we must do it. To help us, we must have Paul's description of Christian love, which must deal with both good and evil. 1 Corinthians 13:6 and 7. Rejoiceth not in iniquity. This is speaking of charity, love in action. rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. No, we're not asked to wear rose-colored glasses to pretend that all is just fine. We are commanded to look through eyes of love, God's love. That is to say, just as God loved us and had mercy on us when we only deserved His righteous indignation and judgment, so we should have the same care and concern for those who may not line up with our human ideas of perfection. We are neither to condemn, which is the work of the Spirit, nor are we to condone, which is the work of the enemy. But we are to show mercy and compassion by the words which we speak. We are to look past the potentially sinful condition of those individuals and see that a soul in need of God's love lies beneath the weight of the enemy's chains. A soul who may one day be just as crucial as Paul to the benefit of others. Only then will our words and actions come from proper godly motivation. All will receive the benefits that God intends for us. Secondly, the Master assured them that no good deed would go unrewarded. He shall not lose his reward. Sometimes one may be offended not for what is done, but for what is not done. One's labor of love for the Master so often may seem, at least to that person, to go unrecognized, unappreciated. These offenses can be just as real and as painful as sticking a finger in someone's eye. Be assured that this will never be the case. Our Master has promised that He who sees all will reward us accordingly. Now, looking back to Jesus' words, we read in Matthew 12:37, "For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned." Jesus knows our every action, as well as the true motivation behind our actions. Often people will convince themselves, as the disciples did in this instance, that they're doing God's will, even though their actions are actually hindering the work of the gospel. Look at Paul, or rather Saul. He was certain that he was doing the work of the Lord by arresting and imprisoning the followers of Christ. No one other than Jesus Himself was able to convince him of his failure. Many in the so-called Christian world today are behaving similarly, and they are just as resistant to receive the truth as Saul was. Finally, the Master expressed His feelings regarding those who would offend anyone who sincerely is attempting to serve Him. "Whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he were cast into the sea." Mark 9:42. Fortunately, none of the disciples were thus drowned for their error that day. The Lord had mercy upon them, as He now does for us when we make such mistakes in judgment. Still, we must never forget the seriousness and the gravity with which our Master looks upon such behavior. As was the case with this little one, the actual harm that we do may never be known to us. But oh, how it grieves the Master. Now is the time for us to cry out with the psalmist in Psalm 139, 23 and 24. "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." If we will be faithful to pray this way, and then faithfully receive God's instructions and align ourselves with His will, His perfect will, innumerable souls, including our own, will be able to obtain that uncorruptible crown that Paul spoke of. I'm going to try to get through this really quick. I'm not going to read this scripture here. The right way to treat the Lord's little ones, part 3. Have you ever wondered if this Apollos could have been the same person the disciples had rebuked earlier? Fortunately, this encounter with a follower of John the Baptist with the church went much better. They too could have forbade him to preach. Instead, when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them. That is, they made it their business, their personal responsibility and commitment to help this precious little one of God to come to a fuller and deeper understanding of Christ. We're not given the details of just what they did, but we can be assured that love found a way. The results of their efforts speak for themselves. This little one, Apollos, became a mighty servant of Christ, being sent on his way by the Ephesian church with their blessings and endorsement. Everywhere he went, he mightily convinced the Jews, and that publicly, shewing by the Scriptures that Jesus was Christ. This is the power of life we are granted by the Spirit of God working in and through us. Offenses, they're certain to come. Jesus said, in this life ye shall have tribulation. Paul said, all who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. These are promises. And in the first one with Jesus, he said, in this life you shall have tribulation. And I can't quote that verse without saying, he didn't say, if you're a Christian, in this life you shall have tribulation. He didn't say, if you're a sinner, in this life you shall have tribulation. He said, in this life, whoever you are, whatever your status, whatever you may think of yourself, whatever others may think of you, in this life, if you are alive in this world today, you are going to face tribulations. How much better is it to be able to face those tribulations knowing that the responses we give are from Christ and will minimize the effect of our tribulations on the lives of those around us. But Jesus said, speaking of those offenses, woe unto him through whom they come. May it never be said that any of us were complicit with the devil in the destruction of the souls God sends our way. Something we need to remember about the ministry of the early church is that their preaching actually drew souls closer to God. The words of life they spoke caused the vilest of sinners to seek a better way. Their words were offensive to some, but most frequently, those who were offended were the religious elite who believed that they already had it all figured out. Think about the book of Acts. When Paul and his companions ministered, it was the Gentiles, those whom we would equate with sinners today, who gladly received the truth and turned away from their sins. But it was the Jews, God's chosen people, who should have been first in line to receive the truth, who stirred up contention and violence against them. The religious right is wrong when by their actions souls are pressed further from God's will and not drawn into the truth by His love, working salvation through His people. I'm not even going to read the conclusion, but I'm going to ask if there are any comments, questions, complaints before we close out this lesson.